U serijalu Rijekama ka zapadu pratili smo priču o nastanku civilizacija. Vidjeli smo kako su se osnivali gradovi i carstva od perioda Mezopotamije prije 12.000 godina do današnjeg dana. Iz jednog potpuno novog ugla prikazali smo kako se karavan civilizacije kretao od dolina rijeka Eufrata i Tigrisa prema drugim dijelovima svijeta. Tok tih civilizacijskih rijeka doveo nas je do modernog doba. Saznali smo kako je Bliski istok pomogao da se uobliči ova epska pripovijest.
Civilization can only be understood through the metaphor of river. They just move on, they change all the time.
Ovdje su bile skoncentrirane aktivnosti od ključnog značaja za formiranje civilizacija, od zemljoradnje do spisateljstva. Ostvaren je veliki napredak u nauci i religijskom razmišljanju. Ovdje je rođen moderni svijet. Na ovom epskom istraživačkom putovanju išli smo slijedom rijeka koje teku s istoka ka zapadu.
U serijalu Rijekama ka zapadu pratili smo napredak civilizacije sve do današnjih dana. Kako se bližimo kraju ovog putovanja, zastaćemo kako bismo sve još dublje sagledali i shvatili gdje nas je taj civilizacijski tok doveo. Osvrćući se na našu historiju, možemo pokušati naslutiti o čemu će se pisati u budućim poglavljima civilizacijske priče. Da li će to biti hronika harmonije ili nesklada? Kroz naš serijal koristili smo metaforu rijeka, kako bismo opisali razvoj civilizacije kroz historiju i ispričali kako su se otkrića prenosila širom svijeta.
There is a direct relation between life and water, life and river. While on the way to the ocean, it takes many things, but also it leaves many things behind. So in a way, this giving and taking is very much related to culture, to civilization, because civilization, give and take.
If you think of civilization itself as a river that moves along and takes with it new ideas and gathers in tributaries as new cultures come in to influence it, then you could think of civilization itself as a river that flows from east to west.
Every civilization has learned from another one. And that's what I call the cross-fertilization.
Birçok yerde yaptığım konuşmalarda belirttiğim gibi tarih boyunca her toplum insanlığın gelişimine kendine özgü katkılarda bulunmuştur. Tüm insanlığın ortak ürünü olan evrensel medeniyet, farklı kültürlerin ve dinlerin birbirleriyle sürekli etkileşiminin eseridir.
Medeniyetler sürekli akmakta olan bir ırmağa benzerler. Irmaklar suları denizlere ve okyanuslara taşırlar ve medeniyetler birleşerek evrensel uygarlığı oluştururlar. Uygarlıkların başlangıç yeri, ana yurdu Mezopotamya'dır. Mezopotamya'dan kalkan medeniyet kervanı dünyanın dört bir yanına ulaşmıştır. Dinler, kültürler ve mitolojiler bu ırmak yoluyla taşınmıştır.
Pojam civilizacija je oduvijek bilo izuzetno teško definirati. Doslovno, On opisuje društvo koje je dostiglo napredni stadij razvitka i organizacije. Ali njegovo tumačenje se veoma razlikuje među različitim kulturama. Ironija je u tome što se sama riječ civilizacija zloupotrebljava kako bi se izrazila navodna nadmoć nad drugim narodima.
The term civilization is often used as an ideological way of claiming superiority, and Western civilization has been particularly subject to that kind of pretension that uses the terminology of civilization to justify the subjugation of non-Western peoples.
Još je prisutan rizik od postojanja zapadnog i evropskog osjećaja superiornosti, koji podsjeća na stoljeća kolonijalizma.
Culturalism as a form of racism exists, unfortunately, even in Europe, and perhaps especially in Europe, if I may say so. Because it says that European culture is worthy of that name, not other cultures. All other cultures are small rivers, so to speak, running into this culture, and they are going to lose their identities because they do not have really strong identities. If we have some cultures resisting this assimilation, they are primitive cultures, they are violent cultures. That was one of the reasons that when the Europeans conquered the non-European lands, they said that they were taking civilization together. They were la guerre civilisatrice, civilizing wars, because they are primitives, they have no proper civilizations. And when people in the occupied lands stood up and said that I want to be independent, this country ought to be an independent country, I have my own nation, I have my own culture and civilizations, the others said, these primitive people know nothing. We are here to enlighten them. We are here to civilize them, but they are so uncivilized that they are not even to see the light of civilizations. You see, behind this idea lies this cultural and civilizational haughtiness, snobbishness, because our culture is the perfect culture.
Zapadna civilizacija se već dugo ponosi svojom intelektualnom i moralnom superiornošću. Ali da li je to opravdano? Na primjer, odakle potiče fasciniranost Zapada naučnim i tehnološkim napretkom?
There is no doubt at all that in the last 200 to 300 years, it is the West that has dominated the world. But it'd be wrong to argue that the global civilization, which we are all witness to, is just Western. Why? Because even if you look at the major characteristics of this dominant Western civilization, they had emerged outside the West.
If one looks more objectively at the reality of civilization in terms of cultural, scientific, human contributions, then there's no question that the civilizations of the non-Western world have been seminal in shaping our knowledge and cultural artifacts that have constituted our awareness of what it means to be human at the highest level.
If you look around us today in our modern civilization, we live in homes, hospitals, we go to school, we go to office, town, travel around the world, look at the sky. In every of those spaces, we find there are numerous inventions, and particularly scientific ones, that we enjoy today, but they come to us from past civilizations. Unfortunately, not many people actually know this. There is almost 1,000 years amnesia, which we refer to sometimes as the Dark Ages. A lot of inventions come from China, from India, from the Middle East, and all this was effectively packaged into what we call Muslim heritage that was inherited by Europe at the Renaissance time. Today, if you bring this up and you fill that amnesia, you will reduce superiority complex in the Western mind. You will, in fact, also reduce inferiority complex in the minds of others who were outside Europe. So what we think we can get is social cohesion within countries that have got different cultures, but also we have intercultural respect and intercultural appreciation internationally.
The fundamental premise upon which Western civilization is based is its command over science. And if you look at the origins and evolution of science, there are many other civilizations that contributed to it, like the Chinese civilization, Hindu civilization, early Persian civilization, and of course Greek civilization. All these civilizations that contributed to the evolution of science, but what we regard as modern science, the biggest contributor was Islamic civilization. It is Islamic civilization which established the scientific method, the method of verification through empirical analysis, deduction, drawing conclusions from experimentation, and that empirical basis of science is the major contribution of Islam. And this is the foundation of contemporary civilization.
Well, they call it the golden age in the Muslim world. I'll give you an example. Who would think that the first university in history was built, financed, and project managed by a young lady by the name of Fatima al-Fihri from Morocco in the city of Fez. The place is still with us. It is functioning at the university, and it's called the University of Al-Qarawiyyin. It was built in the year 859 CE, more than 1,000 years ago. She said that all subjects need to be taught, not only religious subjects, all genders, all people from different nations deserve to have an education.
The experimental methodology of science was discovered, implemented, and developed by Muslim scientists. We can add to these many others when we speak about certain disciplines which were not existing before Islam, like trigonometry, spherical trigonometry. Many discoveries in optics, in chemistry, in physics, in astronomy, you just name it. So you have, for the first time, before English developed as international global language, scientific language today, Arabic language was the lingua franca for scientists all over the world.
U ovom svijetu globalizacije, sve civilizacije vuku korijene iz cijelog niza različitih svjetskih kultura. Ova raznolika baština još uvijek nije u potpunosti priznata na Zapadu.
İnsanoğlunun yüksek seviyedeki etkinliklerinin hulasası demek olan medeniyetler tek bir toplumun, tek bir kültürün, tek bir bölgenin malı değildir. İnsanlığın ortak mirasıdır. Böyle olduğu için de bir kültürün veya medeniyetin kendini diğer kültür ve medeniyetlerden ayırt ederek üstün görmesi, hegemonya kurmaya çalışması ve hatta zaman zaman Batı medeniyetinin yaptığı gibi tek bir medeniyet olarak ifade etmesi son derece tutarsızdır. Batı kendinden önce gelen medeniyetlerden hem de bunun başında İslam medeniyetinden pek çok şeyleri almış, özümsemiş ve kendine özgü yeni bir kurum ve kuruluş meydana getirmiştir.
Jedinstven pogled na civilizacijsko putovanje izražen je u kasnom 20. stoljeću kroz ideju sukoba civilizacija. Taj izraz skovao je ugledni američki akademik Samuel Phillips Huntington.
The idea of clash of civilizations, which goes back to the somewhat polemical writing of Bernard Lewis and Samuel Huntington, is focused on this confrontation between Islam and the West.
Ova karta iz Huntingtonove knjige tipičan je primjer njegovog čvrstog stava u pogledu savremenih civilizacija i njihovih navodnih podjela. Teorija o sukobu civilizacija sugerira da su primarni uzrok sukoba među narodima njihovi kulturni i vjerski identiteti. Ideja je naišla na podršku 1990-ih, ali je bila izložena i značajnoj kritici. Edward Said odgovorio je na Huntingtonove teze u svom dijelu Sukob neznanja. Said tvrdi da je Huntingtonova jasna kategorizacija svjetskih civilizacija izostavila dinamičnu međuovisnost i komunikaciju između kultura i propustila da svemu doda i historijsku perspektivu.
It's a nonsense to talk of a clash of civilizations between East and West. We shouldn't even think of these as two separate entities because these were places and people who constantly exchanged ideas and beliefs, who lived together and whose histories are absolutely inextricably entwined.
In the infamous theory of clash of civilizations, one gets the impression that civilizations are something concrete, a sort of piece of land between which there are deep cracks, so they are something like constructions. They are not like that. They are not like that.
I look at the world divided between those forces who believe in coexistence and those who reject coexistence. It's not a clash between Islam and West. It's really a question of those who believe in coexistence or reject it. That's the fault line.
Drugi su smatrali da teorija Samuela Huntingtona ne predstavlja nikakvu novinu.
When he was alive, I debated with him face to face. My quarrel with him was, where have you been, Sam? Yeah, so in general, I have identified different epochs of clash of civilizations. There was the time when it was genocidal, so they would go into the United States and didn't care how many so-called Indians they killed. And then, as an African, I was all too aware of the slave trade. Westerners went around capturing Africans, enslaving them and selling them and putting them on plantations in the Americas. And then thirdly is the imperial phase, when the Western world more or less decided to steal half of global Earth and put it under Western domination. And now there's a different hegemonic form of clash of civilization because the United States has become disproportionately powerful militarily, with their military capability bigger than the next dozen countries added together. And the United States has no hesitation using its power for that purpose, etc.
Po završetku Drugog svjetskog rata ravnotežu u svijetu održavao je Sovjetski savez. Komunistička Rusija je na Zapadu smatrana državnim neprijateljem broj 1. Huntingtonova teorija o sukobu civilizacija prvi je put ugledala svjetlo dana kada je kasnih 80-ih godina 20. stoljeća ruska moć počela da slabi. Hladni rat je završen. Trebalo je pronaći novog neprijatelja.
Huntington was speaking on behalf of dominant Western interests. I think he wrote with a very obvious ulterior political motive. He was telling the West, the Cold War is over, but don't lower your guard, because there are other civilizations that are emerging and they are a threat to you.
I think it was a very unfortunate thesis that was foisted upon thinking minds, and it was not just a scholarly presentation, it was a kind of position paper for action. That's what was really tragic about it, and it accentuated enmity between the West and the Islamic world and created fears. So I think very illy of it.
Başlangıçta Türkiye'yi sırtını Mekke'ye dönmüş, yüzünü Brüksel'e dönmüş bir köprü ülke olarak tanımlarken, daha sonra Türkiye'nin mutlaka doğuya yönelmesi gerektiğini öneriyordu ve bir müddet sonra da köprü ülkelerin hiçbir zaman kalıcı olamayacağını, köprülerin yıkılmaya mahkum olduğunu ve Türkiye'nin de parçalanacağı öngörüsünde bulunuyordu. Fakat Huntington'un tezi gibi neokonların iktidardan uzaklaşmasıyla birlikte bu teoride tarihin sayfalar arasına gömüldü gitti.
Huntingtonova teorija o sukobu civilizacija dobila je novu podršku u administraciji predsjednika George W. Busha uslijed užasnih događaja od 11. septembra 2001.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
This confrontation between Islam and the West was brought to a climax by the 9/11 attacks that were viewed, especially in the United States, as a kind of validation of the thesis of a clash of civilization.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation.
Budući da su napade 11. septembra počinile osobe koje radikalno tumače islam, islamofobija na Zapadu postala je još veća. Nema sumnje da su ti stravični napadi zagorčali živote mnogim muslimanima koji su do tada mirno živjeli u Sjedinjenim državama i Evropi.
There's a question of the rise of Islamophobia in both Europe and the West. It's one of the great tragedies of our times because it's just systematic. Films coming out, songs coming out, newspaper articles, every form of communication that you see. There's the vein of anti-Islamic rhetoric, which was not there 50 years ago.
My daughters, who are still very young, will look at some of the TV channels and say, Papa, why are they expressing in such an extreme manner and such hatred and abuse against Islam? You know, so this young mind tends to be amazed, not amazed, is appalled by this sort of strong prejudice.
We're less and less worked up on racial differences. On the other hand, prejudice based on values of a cultural kind, that is still very strong, and in some respects it's even getting worse. And that's why Obama has many people in the United States who believe he's a Muslim at heart and regard that as therefore a betrayal of his oath of office. Although there's nothing in the Constitution which says you cannot be a president of the United States if you're a Muslim, but there's enough prejudice against Islam that his race has become less of a compromise than his presumed cultural ancestry.
Kada se zaviri malo dublje u historiju, jasno je kako se na Zapadu stoljećima s vremena na vrijeme pojavljivao strah od islama. U prvom stoljeću svoga postojanja islam se brzo širio Bliskim istokom, Azijom i Sjevernom Afrikom prema Evropi.
Although it was born, so to speak, and brought up in the Middle East, but nevertheless, the life of Islam moved into the Western European life at a very early stage.
To je rezultiralo najozloglašenijim vjerskim ratovima u historiji, krstaškim ratovima.
The Crusades made things much, much worse because this was an organized attempt to challenge Islam. This is where the Islamophobia was disseminated through religious writings and the actual behavior of Christians towards Muslims. There were two very important reasons why Muslims did not react in the same way to this Islamophobic attack upon Islam way back in the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries. Two very important figures from Christianity were so important to the Muslims, Jesus and Mary. Imagine a whole chapter in the Quran which immortalizes Mary. In fact, there are people who would argue that she occupies a much greater position within the Quran than she does in the Bible. So Muslims are very conscious of this.
Judaizam, kršćanstvo i islam vuku korijene sve do objave jednog Boga Abrahamu. To je veza koja je stvorila i razumijevanje i trvenje.
The other reason why Muslims did not retaliate was because there was a very strong attachment to the notion of the common origin of the three religions. The Prophet himself had often linked himself to Abraham, alayhi salam, and the Prophet had said that he was a Hanif. And the Prophet also saw himself in that light. And this, I think, was very strong for the early Muslims, which is one of the reasons why they did not retaliate. So after the Crusades, you had a situation where in the West, largely because they lost, they became very, very negative towards the Muslim world.
Pad Berlinskog zida označio je kraj hladnog rata. Evropa je do tada već zaboravila svoj strah od islama, koji se ponovo pojavio u svojoj jačini. Zaljevski rat izbio je samo 2 godine kasnije.
This kind of hatred is a very, very new thing, making use of old European prejudice against Islam. And certainly was not there when the British Empire fell and it opened its doors to 2 million Pakistanis and Indians and Bengalis, most of whom were Muslims. And suddenly the Islamic population of England went from 100,000 to 1.8 million. It wasn't there. It wasn't there when Germany invited all of the Gastarbeiter from your country.
Stari evropski stereotip zlih istočnjačkih hordi sa turbanima koje mašu krivim istočnjačkim sabljama još uporno živi u glavama zapadnjaka.
هناك أسباب كثيرة لظهور العنصرية ضد المسلمين أو ما يسمى بالإسلاموفوبيا وهو الرهاب الإسلامي وأنا يعني أريد أن أضع هذا المصطلح بين قوسين لأنه يعني أن الإنسان يخاف من شيء لا يعرفه ولكن بعد عدة عقود من الحديث عن الإسلاموفوبيا في أوروبا أن الأوروبيون يعرفون جيداً أو معظمهم يعرفون وخاصة بعد 11 سبتمبر ما هو الإسلام ومن هم المسلمين.
U međuvremenu je savremeni život stvorio nove probleme. Ogromni gradovi i stanovništvo koje se seli s kraja na kraj svijeta doveli su do krize identiteta i u zemljama u razvoju i na Zapadu.
I think that if you travel around the world today and you try to understand what is happening in the Western countries as well as in Africa and Asia, there is something which is common to all our societies. We are facing an identity crisis. And this identity crisis is not only cultural imperialism, is really in every single situation we have a factor putting at risk your sense of belonging and identity.
We have more than one identity. We have a national identity, we have a religious identity, we have a cultural identity, and above all, we have one thing that unites all of us, human identity. And it's very important to preserve one's own core identity, but also embrace the diverse cultures.
In the West today, there is a common factor that is everywhere, is immigration. That we see new people, new faces, new colors, new clothes, and say, who are these people? And by saying, who are these people, you are saying, who am I? This is why the populists are winning in elections, because they target the immigrants by saying, these people are threatening you. So when you are an identity crisis, you face two characteristics. The first one is the victim mentality. That you feel attacked because the people are coming. Who are these people? So this is what we have now everywhere, on the defensive. And the second is you don't listen. You listen less. So identity crises around the world are making people less listening and more on the defensive.
If you really want to have a litmus test, if you want to judge whether a society is a democratic society that respects the rule of law and human rights, it's how the majority treats the minority.
Savremeni mediji omogućavaju zapadnoj kulturi da se proširi cijelim svijetom.
I don't think you have to worry about the domination of civilization as long as the rest have equal opportunity and equal modality to express their own, to articulate and to develop their own. The problem is political more than civilizational. The problem is economic inequality and therefore inequality in the means to express, to articulate, to live out your own values, your own civilizations.
It's a vicious circle that we have now between two perceptions that are nurturing each other. The one is to say, look, you have the money, you have the culture, and you are colonizing us to transform us into consumerists. On the other side, people are saying, yes, but look, all these people, they are coming to take our money and to take our jobs. And we are in a world of victims.
Soğuk Savaş'ın bitiminden bu yana yaşanan ve özellikle son yıllarda kontrolden çıkarak krize dönüşen gelişmeler, farklı kültür ve inanç sistemlerinin birbirlerine tahammül gücünün ne kadar zayıf olduğunu göstermiştir. Öfkelerin kabarmasından en fazla zarar görenler de masum insanlar olmuştur. Bu durum özellikle 11 Eylül'den sonra en belirgin şekilde İslam dünyası ile Batı dünyası arasındaki karmaşık ilişkilerde kendini hissettirmiştir.
Događaji od 11. septembra najviše su okrivljavani za naglo oživljavanje islamofobije u posljednje vrijeme. Ali da li je to zaista jedini razlog?
Of course, everybody thinks it's because of 9/11, which was carried out by nominal Muslims. It was totally against the teachings of Islam to kill innocent people, but nevertheless it was, unfortunately, the whole of Islam has to pay for it. But it's not really 9/11. I believe the main reason is the Israeli-Palestinian situation. The second point, and that is that the interest of the arms industries, you have to have an enemy to sell arms. And once the Soviet Union fell apart, they looked for several years for an enemy. The budget of the Pentagon didn't come down. And this factor added to the terrible tragedy of 9/11.
Mnogi su tvrdili da je ovisnost Zapada o nafti izazvala ratoborne reakcije do kojih je došlo nakon 11. septembra, posebno invazija na Irak.
Terrorism in the past had always been treated as a problem for the police, not a military problem. The United States, in my view, responded to the 9/11 attacks in this war mode, not only because of the gravity and magnitude of the attacks, but because its grand strategy was seeking a pretext for wars in this region, particularly the war against Iraq. The neoconservatives had a blueprint for reconfiguring the Middle East through what they called regime change in crucial countries, starting with Iraq, where they wrongly analyzed the situation as one in which the Iraqi people would welcome liberation because of the tyrannical rule of Saddam Hussein, and that it would be a very easy military intervention that would bring incredibly positive strategic results. The oil, the military bases, and the likely effect of that kind of political change on surrounding neighboring countries. This was a gross geopolitical miscalculation.
Pored geopolitike, smatralo se da je jedan od razloga za ovako agresivan pristup Sjedinjenih država njihovo osnovno nepoznavanje islamskog svijeta.
I have had occasion to be arrested at Miami airport. I wasn't even coming from a dangerous place. I was coming from the Caribbean. And I was interrogated by 3 sets of anti-terrorist guards at Miami airport, and I was detained for about 7 hours. And they asked questions like whether I believe in jihad. I said, look, I'm a professor. If you want a lecture on jihad, be comfortable. There are the following categories of jihad.
Međutim, postojanje takvih kulturnih predrasuda nije ograničeno samo na Zapad.
There are cultural prejudices. There are cultural generalizations in each cultural area, in each cultural and civilizational milieu.
Ali da li su te kulturne razlike tolike da predstavljaju ono što Huntington naziva sukobom civilizacija? Ili je riječ samo o borbi za vlast?
Power, as Lord Acton has rightly said, corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So in a way, we are using cultures, we are misusing civilizations, we are misusing religions in order to attain something political, something military, something economic. So we have got to be very careful when we talk about clash of civilizations.
I think clash of civilization is a fallacy. When you look how this theory came, it came in a time where the West needed to find an enemy. After the collapse of the traditional enemy, the Soviet Union and communism, there was a need to have a counterbalance for a whole system of defense, you call it, or attack, you call it, whatever you call it. There was a need to have some way here to make the equilibrium.
If you look at the interaction between civilizations, most of the time it's positive, they absorb from one another. But every now and then you find that interests come into conflict with one another.
Civilizations, they are not independent living bodies that they themselves attack each other or clash with each other. It depends on who is on the driving seat. And I think the history showed us that there has been always a clash of interests. And this is the crux of the problem, you see, clash of interests, if it is not a clash of ignorance.
Historija je puna velikih carstava koja su se na izgled uzdigla do nepobjedivosti. Da bi nakon nekog vremena propala uslijed promjene svjetskog poretka.
Medeniyetlerin çöküşünün daha çok kendi içlerine kapanmaları ya da kendi kibirli dünyaları içerisinde başkalarına, ötekilere yukarıdan bakmalarıdır. Bilim olsun, düşünce olsun, sanat olsun, hangi alanda olursa olsun dışa açılmadan, başkalarıyla işbirliği yapmadan, ortak değerler etrafında buluşmadan, yani multikültürel bir yapıyı oluşturmadan medeniyetleri ayakta tutmak mümkün değildir.
Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children.
Uz novi vladajući sistem u Bijeloj kući i smrt Bin Ladena, Huntingtonova teorija sada je potpuno odbačena. Ali ako nije riječ o sukobu, o čemu je onda riječ?
There is something that we can call a clash of perceptions, which is not the clash of civilizations, but we have to take this very seriously because populist parties today are using this to gain ground and to win elections while we are not here to oppose these views that are based on mistrust and fear. I think that we have to be much more sophisticated than that. We need trust and mutual understanding.
We want to find a common ground, and we must find the principles, by which principles we are together.
Medeniyetler birbirini yıkarak, yok ederek değil, birbiri üzerine yeni fikirler inşa ederek, yeni bilgiler oluşturarak gelişirler, yükselirler ve hayatta kalırlar. Yani bir medeniyet başka bir medeniyetten ne kadar çok şey almışsa o daha çok şey verebilecek güce ulaşır.
Of course there have been wars, of course there have been conflicts in the past too, but the norm of our human history is more of accommodation, more of a convergence and cooperation among civilizations. We learn from each other.
Working together, believing that by being together, by working together, by showing respect to each other and making every effort to overcome any possibility that leads towards dissension, that leads towards conflict, must be addressed very quickly.
You have two alternatives. Either our adventure in this world is going to destroy us all or going to save us all. Our achievement, the human race's achievement, up to this point, is full of sadness, full of blood perhaps. But again, despite all this, life is quite worth living together on the earth.
U ovoj epizodi serijala Rijekama ka zapadu bavili smo se stvarnim stanjem civilizacije, nastale saradnjom cijelog čovječanstva. Također smo analizirali neke nedavne probleme. U sljedećoj epizodi raspravljat ćemo o budućnosti civilizacije. Razgovarat ćemo o globalnim izazovima, etičkim, intelektualnim i socijalnim problemima i problemima okoliša, svim krupnim pitanjima koja su od vitalnog značaja i kojima se moramo pozabaviti.
Knowing about each other, sharing our own histories, I think this is the biggest challenge of living in this diverse world.
Čućemo mišljenja vodećih mislilaca sa onih mjesta koja su bila izvori civilizacije. Pozabavit ćemo se našom ulogom u sutrašnjem svijetu. Šta trebamo uraditi kako bi svijet učinili mjestom na kojem svako može mirno živjeti.